And so what I want to do is just give an overview of what we're talking about when we talk about the four bodies, and maybe a little bit about the fifth. And then we'll go into some different activities, which should be fun and illustrate some of these concepts. And this is really only the tip of the iceberg. We're hoping to be able to develop these ideas, thoughts, activities more in the spring full faculty meetings and in the in-service that we're planning for June. So if you can be thinking about questions that come up, jot them down and let us know so we can bring those back. Questions, thoughts, ideas, what you might like to know more about. And yeah. Okay, so four bodies. When we think about the four bodies, we could think of them sort of concentrically, and we'll start with the physical body. We all have a physical body. You know, you're sitting on it right now, and it's not hard to understand this one because we're so familiar with it. In the natural world, we see the mineral world has a physical body. You know, all the stones, the mountains, everything that is in existence that's concrete has a physical body. I was thinking about the physical bodies with eurythmy and trying to, walk the triangle. There was somebody else's physical body right there. I couldn't actually take that place in space until that person's physical body moved. So that's what we're talking about with our physical body. And we talk about gestation and birth a lot as a metaphor for understanding these bodies. And so we all started with a physical body, but before we were physically born, it wasn't available to us to do anything with. You know, we had it, we were, in utero, but when you think about it being available, that's a good way to think about it. You had this body, but you couldn't do anything with it until you were physically born. So, in looking at our schema, that's birth. Then the etheric body is the body of life forces. It's, the difference between a living person in a coma and a corpse. And in the natural world, plants have etheric bodies also. They live. So the etheric body, or the life forces, is what grows, what can stop growing, and it permeates our living body, our physical body, but it's a little bigger. And that's actually where the word etheric comes from. It's kind of an old-fashioned word for the atmosphere. It's really, here's our body, then there's the atmosphere of the earth. That's the etheric body. Then the astral body is what's kind of farther out, and it comes from, obviously, the word for stars. It's out and it's as far as the cosmos. And animals also have astral bodies. And right now besides our own dog, we're taking care of a friend's puppy this week, and it's a very perky puppy, and our house is filled with astrality, with this little perky puppy jumping up on our other puppy and all this movement, and it's very astral. So the astral body is the body of, we say, likes and dislikes, wants and desires. Pop culture is sort of the astral world in our society. When you think about drama, okay, that's generally astral. And then there's the ego forces, or we don't talk about the ego body so much, we talk about the ego, and that's distinct from Freud's ego. It's not, the Freudian sense of self that he used the word for ego. It's more, we think of it as kind of a higher self, more of our spiritual self. And whereas the astral body often seems like the center of fun, the ego is the center of your to-do list. And in a small sense and a large sense, it's like the executive functioning part, it's your conscience, it's where morality lives. And it's your higher purpose or your calling. That's a way to think of your ego. And there's another one beyond that that I don't know too much about. After that is the spirit self. And when we think about one of the reasons I'm nervous, and I was saying this to a few people, it's like I've spent 30 years telling kids stuff, right? Standing in front of classrooms, but not so much in front of adults. But when I am in front of a classroom, I'm teaching out of my ego. And I don't know if we have time to get into this, but this pedagogical law of the body above is what's teaching or nurturing the next body. I'm drawing on my spirit self, which I don't very often do, to speak to all of your egos. And so my spirit self is nervous. So as far as the life stream goes, and sometimes we talk about incarnating down or going up, and I wouldn't get too concerned about directionality there. But after birth, the physical body is available. It's right there. And in these first, we think of 7 years, but that's we can be wishy-washy with that. Let's go with 5 or 6. While the physical body is here, the etheric body is gestating. It's obviously there because the child is not a corpse, but it's immature. And in order for it to develop and grow, it needs to be nourished by the etheric bodies around it. And in my limited understanding, that's the heart of early childhood. When we talk about the etheric bodies, we're talking especially about the etheric bodies of the parents and the teachers, if they're lucky enough to be in an early childhood program with teachers who are thinking of this. And that's why, when you're taking care of a baby or a toddler, physically you're not doing that much, but it is so draining because they are metaphorically sucking your life forces. And that's why when you think back to the etheric world being the world of plants, that's why we want children to have so much time, especially young children, in nature so they can suck the life forces from those plants as well. And I was just thinking about this when I was creating this. We call it a kindergarten. It's a garden. It's the plant life of the children, or what they have in common with plants that we're growing. So around 6, 7, the etheric gets born. In that sense, we mean it gets liberated. It's no longer, it's kind of matured, and it's more available to be used by this human being. The physical thing that we see as an indication of that is the change of teeth. The etheric has gotten so incarnated into the body that it pushes out those things that really are part, that ultra mineral aspect of the human body. So then the astral is kind of the heart of, we would say, the elementary years. So the etheric body then is available. The etheric body is also often where memory lives. And so in the grade school is where we draw on those forces. We don't do memorization in early childhood because that's drawing on the etheric, so the etheric can't do what it needs to do in the physical body and grow and replenish itself. So we try, not to draw on this, but the way that the etheric body is nourished, and when we think about the etheric body, other ways to think about it is our immune system, and how do we nourish and support our immune system? Besides echinacea, we have rhythm, sleep. We know how important it is to sleep when we are unwell, and warmth. And this warmth is physical warmth, which is why the EC teachers are so obsessed with those children being well dressed, but it's also emotional, nurturing warmth. It's the warm smile. It's the warmth of a live voice as opposed to a recording, and just, you know, just emotional warmth that we want to surround young children in. And if they don't have that, then it's like a physical body that doesn't have enough nourishing food. It will continue and develop, but in a kind of stunted way. And I think that's one of the things that we're seeing in our society, and the growing unhealthiness of people. It's their etheric bodies that are unhealthy, that are weak, that have holes in them, that are scrawny, because they haven't been nourished with life forces and warmth. And when we see children who have a lot of early academics in a kind of forced way, we also see that they don't have that robust, abundant, healthy life force that we want to see, you know, healthy children having. Okay. So then with the astral body, I think of the astral body especially when I think of movement, or vice versa, movement. And this is also the world of the arts, all the you know, painting and music and activities. And in thinking of our play yards here at school, you know, we have play yards for the EC programs, the preschool programs, which are pretty small, and then we have the big field for the children who are in this stage. And it would be nice to have bigger play yards for the EC, but it kind of works. But if you can imagine, if we had even the same number of fourth graders in just the natural play area or just the preschool play area, you know, they'd be bumping into each other physically, etherically, and astrally. Or you can imagine if, you know, the kindergartens just went out onto the field, you know, they'd be lost. They wouldn't be held by, there aren't enough ego forces and to hold them in a huge big field. So that's how I think about the movement in relation to these different bodies. So then it's around 5:14, but it starts earlier, and in our culture earlier and earlier. The astral, which has been gestating, while the etheric has been available for education. And then it gets born, and there we have, like, it starts with, we talk about the 12-year change. And we talk about birth, but I also wrote up there, there's labor before birth, as many of us know. And it can be a few days, you know, maybe a year. I think I'm noticing it maybe takes longer and longer. The amount of labor time increases as you go into the more distant bodies, maybe because they have more, you know, to go to incarnate, more to come in to incarnate. But anyway, so, you know, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, this astral body is being born. It's kind of becoming, so it's been integrated and matured so that it's more available. But what's in charge of the astral body is the ego, and the ego is very immature in these grades. It's, you know, hardly even gestating yet. So you have all this astrality in young adolescents and the tweens, of all these likes and dislikes and wants and desires without much inside to direct it. And that's kind of crazy. That's when you go to the 6th grade room, right, Chris? Yes. Yeah. Or the 7th grade room, and then you have just all this astrality. It's also where, you know, interest in pop culture really gets keen in these years. So I think our society is very astral. You know, you see a lot of astrality in our society. People just doing kind of what they want to do when they want to do it, without the ego forces. So The ego is unique to human beings on Earth. Animals, they have an astral body, they have movement, but they don't have a sense of purpose for their life. They live more on instincts. I think when you think about like conscience and morality, one way to understand the difference is, and we talk about with children more like sympathy. When we want to educate them morally, we try to draw on their sympathies, like, oh, somebody's hurt, or we don't want to harm animals or harm anything. Whereas in the ego, you're drawing more on an abstract morality. You're talking about right and wrong. And some other metaphors I think of for the ego and astral. So the astral is candy and the ego is kale. It'd be fun to eat candy all day long and chocolate and coffee. But the ego says, well, you really ought to throw in a salad there every once in a while. And I think here's the difference between why we have games class and why we have PE, physical education. Games class, it's joyful and fun, and I know that education is happening there, but it's a lot of movement. It's social, but you're not really like focusing on skills like you are with floor hockey or volleyball or something. Another really good analogy I find in thinking about these is, along with animals and humans, is like the horse and the rider. We have these astral bodies, and you think about a wild horse, it needs a rider to direct it, to decide where it's going to go or what work it's going to do. That's one of my favorite analogies. So, what nourishes or what helps the ego to gestate? We have inspiring role models, really well-developed ego forces in history and in life. It's why we do a lot of biographies in the upper grades, to inspire the egos of the students, to hear about the ego development and along the lines of the conscience, the self-sacrifice of people who have really made a difference in our society, because they didn't make a difference because they were following their likes and dislikes. They made a difference because they had a purpose in their life. They had a conscience. And so even though they may not be in the classroom teaching, learning about them is helps to nourish and develop the ego of people, the ego of the students. And then also thought and discussion. Not to say we don't have discussions in other grades, but it's where you're really kind of bringing in the idea of thinking and reflecting together as a way to nurture the egos that are there. So the ego generally isn't really born in kind of the simple 7-year cycles until the age of 21. And I think it's really interesting in our society if we think about the ego as what brings purpose to one's life, is how many people change majors in college. They go in at 18, they think they want to, I'm pre-med, or I'm, want to be a lawyer, or I'm poli-sci or whatever. And then over the course of a few years, once their ego has developed a little more and is a little more there, they realize, oh wait, no, my purpose is really anthropology or Waldorf education or something crazy like that. And if you want to think about previous lives, the ego is the part of the body that you have that had a previous life. And that's why it has some purpose, because it's been here before and it's come here to do something. And yeah. So, do you have any questions? Joe, yeah.
Where does like introspection and journaling and meditation, is that more ego or is that more spirit self?
That's a good question. To me, I think, I would say it's kind of the spirit self gestating and the ego being active. The ego actively reflecting and kind of mentally exploring something. I'm thinking out loud right now. This isn't what I remember Rudolf Steiner saying or anything.
I'm just trying to picture at what age can you expect students to be looking at their own behavior and correcting it? Is it like not yet, or? I've got 2 teens, so I'm curious.
Yeah, Sonia?
In all of this, when I did my teacher's training, it talked about that time between 22 and being 30 is that time that you're opening up to that, like to God in a sense, and exploring the world and going in more meditatively, and you're going through what is the 27-year change, which is very much like the 9-year and 12-year changes that happen. And so that time you're like really blooming and opening and going internal. So daughters aren't there yet.
So many ideas. I don't know. Hang on.
Mine's quick.
Yeah.
Just to piggyback off that, like we were talking about some of these the other bodies too, it might not be something that they can master at that age, but to practice, right? You showing them and walking them through the steps of this is how we self-reflect, and like they are drawing on your ego force, right? And you're helping develop that in them. So even though they might not be able to do it at your level, it's still a really helpful activity to help them develop that capability. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's really important to not only tell teenagers about these other great people, but to work on becoming, your best ego, and to be the role model. It's why I think teenagers are so easy and quick to pick up on hypocrisy in parents. You say I should do this and you never do, but it's when you're drawing on your own ego forces, and when there are parents or teachers who are all over the place and irresponsible, there's nothing that the teenagers are able to draw on to nurture their own ego, which is why I think often you have parents, when you have parents who are all over the place and irresponsible and don't follow through with what they're going to say, it's really hard for their children not to grow that way because they haven't been nourished. It's sort of, taking this analogy back, it's really hard to have a really healthy baby if the mother physically and etherically is not healthy. Jenna?
You're kind of getting into my question. Like in a physical form, the mother is, like the baby is malnourished, they might be compromised. You can kind of try and do things physically to address that. So I'm wondering in this sense, if somebody's, like you were saying, stunted at a certain stage, is there repair work or things to do to help if you've missed that key window to rebuild that so that they're fully formed, so to speak, with that body and can move forward, or is it kind of like too bad?
Yeah, I don't know the answer. I would think, physically, if somebody isn't physically nourished, to take the analogy further, if somebody isn't physically nourished, they can become healthier and they can improve their physical health, and which is essentially their etheric health later on, but maybe it would always be limited in some way. And perhaps that's the way it is as well. Although, the ego is a lot more, it's because it's self-directive. I think we have a lot more, as an individual, you have a lot more control over your ego. And if you, as a teenager, were in that kind of a family or school or whatever, you can decide, I'm going to try to develop my ego more, and so I'm going to do this little thing, and these are a lot of the exercises that Rudolf Steiner offered to develop our ego. You know, and you do just a little bit and you get stronger, and you do a little more and you get stronger as well. I think also in looking at how, well, I guess we'll save this for later, but to do the ego, you know, once the ego is born, and we're all up in this area, our ego has been born, the spirit self is what is kind of teaching it and can help it develop. And as I said, I don't know all that much about it, but what little I've read is that that's where you have kind of like the superhumans, not in the sense of like superpowers, but like the Dalai Lama or Nelson Mandela, the people who have such a sense like beyond just a conscience and a purpose for themselves, but for their society. That's more of the spirit self. And so when you think about somebody who can, you know, I talk about my spirit self being nervous talking to 50 people. When somebody can stand in, you know, Yankee Stadium and speak to 50,000 people, you know, that's got to be a spirit self doing that. And so reading more works that are inspiring in a spiritual way, I think, is a way for us to develop our ego more as well.
Do you know what Steiner says about like young people who are just extraordinary? Just they have done great things at such a young age, like Greta Thunberg. Like what do they just have like such a high spirit self early?
Yeah, my guess, I don't know for sure, but if you ask what Jodi thinks, that, you know, you're talking about the ego has been here before, so I would say in a previous life or lives, it's had so much experience or education that it's kind of got a head start when it comes here. I don't know if anybody, Lydia?
I would just say, like, just with physical development, you know, with your own children, some kids grow faster than others, some kids develop this or that faster than others, and I think, you know, some individuals just have, there's not a set, concrete, discrete timetable for all these things. Like you said, the astral's all around the whole time.
Yeah.
So some people dip it in more quickly.
So I'm out of practice with this, so I'm at a loss of bit for words, but so I did Feeling Touch and learned a lot about energy work, and it seems so related, and I was curious if there's any study between Steiner and chakras or energy, because it also says like, so doctors can receive like, you know, certified teaching credit for learning about energy with the body if there's an overlap with, if you're working with a child and etheric, like intentionality with chakras, or just I don't know if that makes sense. Is there any overlap in those studies between these two?
Yes. I know that, I can't say which one. There's anthroposophical medicine, I think, is what you're talking about, where they're looking at this and how we can use it to treat the physical body and the etheric bodies. Susan, and maybe
Jumping off of
massage.
that, and jumping off of Janelle's comment too, just that as you talk about some of these other areas that maybe were stunted in growth, given what was happening in your gestation period, that I see that when you're in the ego and looking at the spirit self, being able to consciously go back and heal those. And that might involve others, but that might involve just really deep work within yourself to go back and heal that etheric body. And I've seen people like actually physically get better because they consciously are doing that.
Yeah.
Or they're open to discovering how they can do that.
And it's all so interrelated, but you know, if you have your ego deciding, you know, I want to be healthy, or I need to, you know, I want to stay up and do Wordle or spelling bee, not that I would do that, but I know I need to go to sleep. Somebody who knows this situation is laughing. You know, and so I have to go to sleep. And so that's where, you know, you have these interrelations. So Please do remember questions, thoughts, ideas you have to carry this further, but I don't want to encroach on the next session.